Welcome to the latest episode of Faith in a Digital World here on TWR-UK. Today, we'll be talking about what it means for boys to grow up in a world shaped by smartphones, social media, and constant digital noise. The digital landscape is evolving faster than any generation before them, and while we often hear about the pressures that girls face online, which we talked about last week, boys are navigating their own complex and often overlooked terrain. They're wrestling with questions of identity, belonging, masculinity, and mental health, all while trying to make sense of platforms that were never designed with their well-being in mind. The result is a generation of young men forming their sense of self in an environment that can be both empowering and deeply disorienting. To help us make sense of all of this, I'm delighted to say we'll be joined by Dave Boden, speaker, youth specialist, and author of the book Raising Gen Alpha. Dave has spent many years working closely with young people and the adults who care for them, listening to their stories, their struggles, and their hopes. His latest book digs into what it looks like to raise boys who are resilient, grounded, and spiritually formed in a digital age. Boys who can navigate the online world without losing themselves in it. Together we'll be asking, what's really going on for boys online? How is social media shaping the men that they're becoming? And what can parents, carers, and churches do to guide them with wisdom and hope? This is a conversation about culture, character, and the future of our sons. And I think it matters more than ever. Dave Boden, thank you so much for joining us on today's programme. How would you describe the unique pressures that boys face online compared to girls?
In many ways, the pressures that boys face online are the same pressures that we've all faced growing up as boys over the years. So if you imagine life as a teenager, it can be easier for some of the others. We've got puberty, we've got challenges of what it means to grow up, we've got relationships, friendships. You mentioned identity, masculinity, social issues. And all of these the volume of those gets turned up to 11 when we live in this digital online world. Now screens have become the default means for communication with many, many young men. And, you know, the next generation, Generation Alpha, those born from 2010 onwards, they're not just growing up around screens, they're growing up completely and utterly immersed in them. And 97% of 13-year-olds have got a smartphone. And one striking stat, which I find fascinating from a recent report by the Centre for Social Justice on boys and the impacts of social media, says that more boys are more likely to own a smartphone than live with their father nowadays. Well, of course, this means that the unique pressures for young men mean that more than ever, they're having to shape their identity and form their sense of self-esteem through the role models and the algorithms that they're facing online rather than those in real life. And I think that causes quite a few challenges along the way.
Let's go on to talk about that in a bit more detail then. There's so much there that we could talk about. Let's start by talking about some of the influencers. This is a topic that I regularly hear about in the news. Many boys online gravitate towards influencers who present extreme versions of masculinity. We've all seen reports about them. Why do you think those voices are resonating so strongly with so many young men in our world today?
I think there's a big issue around identity, belonging, and purpose for young people in general. So when young people are searching, again, in the same way that young men always have, for answers to who am I, where do I belong, and what am I here for? When they start to find a vacuum of answers through real relationships, where they find those relationships challenging, maybe actually all us adults being on social media all the time and all us adults being on screens means that we're spending less time together in person. Maybe there's a sense of disconnection between generations. So this vacuum grows in the real world, and therefore young men gravitate more towards their online connections, an online sense of curiosity. And then what happens is the algorithm starts to dictate to them what they should be seeing. So the reason why it's so prevalent and been such a challenge for young men is, in many ways, it's not just that they're the key voices they're hearing. They're the only voices. And when you only hear one thing said in one way, you start to take that as fact and start to believe that is true. Whether it's an algorithm or AI or social media or peer pressure. Again, in the past, we may have heard these things around the schoolyard. Now, young men are being bombarded with key messages day after day, screen after screen, scroll after scroll.
Do you think that some of these voices that are presenting an extreme version of masculinity, do you think they're trying to fill the gap that perhaps has gone missing since we've stopped talking about things like faith and meaning? Do you think they're trying to replace those things in boys' lives?
Maybe not intentionally, but there's absolutely, in my view, some sort of replacement going on. And it's just a vacuum, isn't it? It's the vacuum of relationships. So one of the things that in the work that I do with young people through schools is the most powerful impact we make is by creating space for young people to engage with a trusted adult. And statistically, there's so many young people now who don't feel that they have that real life connection to make. So therefore, the voices that they're hearing online, they're often then going to be replaced by that, aren't they? They're going to start to believe that that is fact and actually think, well, there's no other alternative here. And I think it's actually, where the church can so step in is to offer a powerful counterculture and a powerful counter narrative as well. But I'm sure we'll get onto that.
Well, I tell you what, let's get onto it now, seeing as we've started that part of the conversation. What can men like you and I'm in my 40s, I wouldn't dare guess for you, Dave, because I'm too polite.
I'm in my 40s too.
So we're
right
both
in the middle.
We're both in our 40s. What can we do to try and mentor the next generation of young men in the church?
I think the first thing that we have to do is to actually engage with them. And one of the statements that I always use is the secret to learning to love young people is to actually love them and to actually take an interest in them. And we had 20 teenagers in my house last night and sat around till 10 o'clock at night talking about all things from faith, identity and purpose, having the real world conversations that to provide a counter narrative to what they're seeing online. And genuinely, it starts with taking an interest and becoming curious about what's going on in young people's lives. And what we've found in our family is that when you're curious about what's going on in a teenager's life, it's such a rarity that they immediately begin to open up to you and gravitate towards you. And you then have a powerful opportunity to input positively into their life. So that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is to provide some alternatives. So we've jumped straight into some of the challenges of being online and the voices and influences out there that can be quite negative. But there's a huge amount of incredibly positive things that the online world holds for us. And we need to, as parents, there's a difference between becoming tech avoidant and becoming like tech apathetic of thinking young people can do what they want. We need to be tech wise, and we need to teach young people to be tech wise as well, I think, as we're navigating life with them. And it means that we've got to realize that social media has a hugely social aspect to it. And maybe we should enjoy that as well. Gaming can be super incredibly positive. Yes, it has some challenges to it. There are many voices and ways of accessing incredible information, facts, inspiration, faith development, and dare we say discipleship through that algorithm. So as adults, we need to signpost young people to that. For example, with my own children, I'm often sending clips and content to them because I know it will be consumed by them.
I think that's an interesting point. The gaming point, we will go on to talk about gaming in a bit more detail later on. But I remember working with a young person who I just could not get to open up to me. He clearly had some issues going on, struggling at school, on the verge of university. And I would meet up with him and he started to open up when we were playing FIFA. Now, Dave, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm the world's worst FIFA player. I can just about manage to pass the ball. So he would regularly beat me 8 or 9-0. But he would open up to me as we played. And I think that's the key here, isn't it? Sometimes we can walk into a church full of young men who've rolled up to a youth group. They've got no Christian background at all, and that seems terrifying. But my experience is that if you're just interested in them, if you're interested in their lives, they will very, very quickly learn to respect you.
Absolutely. And remember, when it comes to gaming, gaming is a hugely social thing now. It's not, so when I was growing up, I used to play Sonic the Hedgehog. This is really going to age me now. And Sonic the Hedgehog was a game that you played on your own, and you went from, left of the screen to the right of the screen. And you had to, if you wanted to kind of like get addicted to it and play into the early hours, you had to pause the screen and then go off and have your dinner and come back to it. Now these young people have fully immersive, always online worlds. Players are connected to strangers around the world. They're intensely connected virtual worlds that these young people are coexisting in and moving into in many ways. And I think whereas Sonic the Hedgehog was designed with a real end point, you completed it, you did it, and then you moved on. And you got excited as you saw the end credit screen. These games have no end. They are designed to suck you in and keep you there forever and a day. And, that has a positive aspect to it because of socialization and the immersion and the creativity. It also develops young people with problem-solving skills and teamwork skills, which are actually employably transferable into the real world. And genuinely, you can educate yourself through games in a very, very powerful way. But of course, it also means that it can lead to tiredness, poor focus, mood, addiction, being so focused into one thing that you forget the main thing and other things as well. So as adults, when we're often thinking about social media or gaming, I think that we bring our definition of that to the forefront. So we think games are Sonic the Hedgehog when they are not. We think that social media means Facebook when it does not. So we have to be curious, not just about young people, but about the platforms and the systems that they're using in order to be able to help engage with them and meet them where they're at.
As a parent, Dave, what advice would you give parents of boys who are beginning to get into gaming? So I hear this discussion quite a lot. Is it okay for a boy to have their gaming console and their setup in their room in private, or does it need to be in a space where they can be listened into to make sure that the people that they're talking to are okay, that they're behaving reasonably online? How have you wrestled with all of that in your own story?
I think it's about how you engage with your children and have the conversation. You have to have an open conversation. So there has to be clear boundaries, but there also has to be trust because, Jonathan Haidt said that we have overprotected people in the real world and underprotected people in the online world. And the reality is, as soon as you enter any online space, there are no 100% safeguards. And obviously, as parents, everyone has a different view on how they safeguard their children, different filters and settings that they can set up on games as well. And I think, one of the criteria I would say is, do you know what games your young people are playing? And do you know who they're playing them with? Let's start there. Because a lot of parents I speak to cannot answer those questions. And I think it's important to then take an interest and to set boundaries and talk with your young person. So there are some things to look out for and signs to spot that if you feel your young person is becoming secretive about what they're doing online and in gaming, that can be a challenge. If you ask them who they're talking to and they don't answer you in a straight way and they waffle, then that's another sign. One of the great things for me in my house is my son, in fact, my daughter as well, that they love playing games with a group of their friends from church and school. And if I don't worry too much about who they're playing with, because I can hear them shouting at the screen and regularly engaging in that social aspect of what it means to game. But certainly, who are they playing online with is really, really key. And then it comes down to asking what happens when you ask them to stop. What happens when you ask them to disengage for a while? Are they being irritable, angry, or upset? That might be a sign that maybe that another conversation is needed. Are they staying up late and being so tired that they're not meeting their other responsibilities in life, especially school? So, like with like my daughter, She just turned 15, but she'll have her phone to a certain time at night, and then it will come into our bedroom. And again, when it comes to the prioritizing of things like homework and things like revision, that's got to all be built into the mix of gaming as well. I think if they begin to lose interest in doing other things as well and only do that, that's something where as a parent you'd want to be a flag and be a little bit concerned about. And if they start to game to not just for light relief and fun, but to escape some of the real world issues that are going on for them, there's probably a red flag there as well. So we've discussed all these things with our children over the years, and I'd encourage other parents to do the same. It's about being engaged, isn't it? And interested without being too judgmental.
If you've just joined us, or if you're listening while juggling something else, let me pause for a moment just to remind you where we're at in this conversation. We're talking about what it means for boys to grow up in a world that is always online, always connected, and always demanding something from them. It's a world that can be full of opportunity, yes, but also full of pressures that can quietly shape how they see themselves, how they relate to others, and what they believe it is to be a man. I'm not exploring this alone. I'm joined by Dave Boden, speaker, youth specialist, and author of the book Raising Gen Alpha. Dave spends his days working with young people and the adults who care for them, helping families and communities understand the digital forces that are shaping this generation. His insights into how boys are forming their identity, their resilience, and their faith in a hyper-connected world are incredibly timely. If you've been following our series, you'll know that last week we looked at the impact of the digital world on girls, the pressures, the expectations, and the unique challenges that they face online. If you'd like to catch that episode, just head over to our website at twr.org.uk/on-demand. If you've been with us so far, you'll know that today we're turning the lens towards boys, not to compare struggles, but to recognise that their experiences are a little bit different and they deserve just as much thoughtful attention. So as we continue, let's keep that bigger picture in mind. This isn't just about screens or apps, but about the kind of young men that we want to raise and how we can guide them with wisdom, compassion, and hope. Dave Boden, thank you for staying with us. I'm the parent of a baby born within the past year, a baby boy. I'm very aware that at some point I will have to have these conversations with him, and I'm slightly terrified about the prospect of it. What advice would you give parents like me who are worried about having these discussions?
I think you need to do some research yourself because we can't bury our heads in the digital sand when it comes to this. So I think having a basic understanding of what's going on with the social media. So, for example, with my children, there are some apps that they have and some that they won't have, and there's very clear reasons for that. We also have the capacity to be able to check their social media at any point. So if I go on and say, give me a password, I will look at the DMs and look at what's going on for them. And we've done that in the past. So preparing for what's to come, I think there's too many people who just do not take the time to educate themselves with the basic information. And they sleepwalk into digital immersion without realizing that you are still the parent and you have the boundaries. So we have a situation now where, especially post-pandemic, children are coming into schools and they are learning to swipe a screen before they're learning to, actually go onto the toilet properly. There's a statistic recently which talks about the number of children, that 1 in 10 children are coming into school and they do not know how to use a book. Now, what I mean by that is that they get a book and they open it and they start tapping it and they don't understand why it's not working like a screen. So they've so become screen defaulted that things like reading and then obviously like social, emotional, and literacy skills are so underdeveloped now because young people are being raised by screens. So we talk about screen ages a lot in my work, but also it's before they get to becoming a screen ager. So advice to parents would be, have you got a set of family values around your digital use? Are you limiting that use, or are you just doing what every other parent is doing because you think that's the way it should be? To what extent do you know what they're watching and what they're engaging with, and how much are you shaping that, or just letting the algorithm do it? And then the final thing I would say is, what are you role modeling? So I know with my own kids, they will call me out on this stuff, especially this next generation. The Gen Alpha kids because they see it. And what's been really interesting, some of the stats around Gen Alpha versus Gen Z, a lot of the Gen Alpha kids are rebelling against social media because they've seen how Gen Z have got lost in it and completely depressed by it, and it's affected their mental health so much. So they're actually positively rebelling and saying, why would we want that? Let's get outside more. So I think it's encouraging some of those healthy habits and practices. And also, I would say, as parents, creating an environment where real world experiences still matter. Because we now have a world where kids are being raised by Alexa, they're being raised by YouTube, and increasingly being raised by AI. And even parents themselves are going to AI to answers to issues about parenting. So we're sort of removing that sense of common sense and wisdom and digitizing and making everything artificial. So we're becoming more artificially intelligent as humans before we even use artificial intelligence. So what we need to do is to really focus on the benefits and joys of what it means to be in the real world. And especially for boys, young men need rites of passage. Young men need relationships. They need a sense of belonging. So where do you create that for them? Where do you hold that sense of camaraderie, that sense of fun, that sense of silliness that all young men need? Because they are being shaped by the algorithms. So as a dad or as a responsible adult, as a trusted adult in a young person's life, how do you model what it means to be a healthy man by your definition? There's been a load of research done on the man boxes. You've probably heard about the man box, and it's this idea of what you put in your box determines how masculine you are. And I think those kind of conversations are important to have. What are the stereotypes and assumptions that we say about what manhood is and what it means? And how are we passing those on to the next generation? Is it okay for boys to cry? Is it okay for boys to like certain jobs and behave in certain ways when they're considered traditionally more feminine? And I think those kind of conversations led by real positive role models, they're the key for parents and for those working with young people's lives.
This has been such an interesting conversation. Can we just talk about faith formation as well? How do you think we can use the online world to build up our boys to have a strong Christian faith?
Yeah, that's a great question. So think about AI, think about the algorithm. What it does is it constantly puts in front of young people their perception of what they believe to be true and a picture of reality and presents a worldview. How do we as Christians do that with our children and young people? So the Old Testament talks about discipleship, doesn't it? And it talks about, like, when you get up and when you go to bed, write the word of God on your doorposts. So how do we introduce repetition and rhythm when it comes to sharing scripture? How do we have real world in-person experience that invite young people into an experience of faith, not just to read about it? So we, in our family, when you pray regularly, when you invite young people into an experience of worship in your home, not just on a Sunday morning in a meeting, these are the kind of rhythms and rituals and rites of passage that we create for the next generation. And boys need it more than ever. And when we do that in line with our family values and our family vision, I believe that has a huge impact on the next generation. The stats are in and they are good. They say that if you're a parent or a carer, that you are still the number one influence in a boy's life. And that is way more than social media, way more than gaming, way more than teaching in schools and even peers. And unfortunately, or fortunately, way more than even church leaders. Parents are the number one influence on a young person's life. And I think sometimes we abdicate responsibility for that, or we forget that that is the truth. So we think that everything's getting broken, everything's going one way, and that we've got no say in it, so we just go with the flow of it. But when it comes to shaping and forming young men that have character, purpose, and meaning, we've got a question to ask ourselves as the church. Are we going to let the algorithm and AI do it for us? Or are we going to take responsibility to be those real in-person people that make a difference for the next generation?
I'm just thinking, Dave, when my boy becomes a teenager, so in 13 years' time, do you think you'll be worried about all this then? Do you have a sense that because of all of the negative stories about social media that are out there, all of the discussions about whether social media will be banned for people under the age of 16, do you think the next generation, is this even going to be something that they need to deal with?
I think they'll be dealing with the consequences of it. And what's interesting is this Generation Alpha we mentioned earlier, young people born from 2010, most anxious-minded generation there's ever been. But they are also leading influencers. They're young people who want to make a change and want to make a difference. And I think we will see young people leading change over the next 5 to 10 years in this area, as well as the adults. But I think that it will be almost like, with climate change, how there's this sense that, certainly amongst Gen Z, that they're looking at the millennials and the Gen Xers and saying, what have you done to us? And trying to hold them accountable for it. I think the Gen Alpha and Gen Beta who are emerging after them will look back at us adults and they will there will be a reckoning, and they will say, how on earth did you let us get into all this stuff without actually even thinking about it? How do we sleepwalk into this society? So there will be I believe, a kind of kickback against it from your children. The question will be, have we equipped them to understand what it means to find purpose, to find meaning, and to find identity? We as Christians would believe in our faith and through Christ first, and through what it means to be part of a church community. Or will we literally just let the algorithm dictate their definition of it? And remember that the algorithm is not there to promote your human flourishing. The algorithm is designed for one reason and one reason only, and that is to grab your attention so it can monetize your eyeballs. And I think when we teach young people that's when they'll start to rebel against it as well, even more.
So just one final question, if I may, and I didn't pre-warn you about this. I've asked a few people on this series so far this same question, and I want your immediate response. So I'm able, Dave, to take you into a room that has a big red button in it. And if I was to invite you to press the red button, and in doing so, you would wipe out all of the social media side of the digital revolution. Now, in the context of this conversation, that would include all of the social media sites. It would include gaming. It would include YouTube. So with one press of the button, I could get you to wipe it out. Would you press it?
I wouldn't press it. But what I would want to do is press a button that takes us back to the early stages of when all this is forming, and have some real conversations about how values-based this is going to become and how we drive it towards human flourishing and not just monetization and not just politicization. But that is a very idealistic statement driven by my heart of hope for the kingdom of God. It's not a statement driven by reality, because we know that whenever a medium comes in, whether it's the printing press or artificial intelligence, it always contains the DNA of human brokenness. And I think I would love to go back, and I'd love to be able to say, this is what's coming. This is how we need to shape it and form it for the benefit of all, because it has so many incredible aspects of it and can benefit the world in such a way that I don't even think we've ever tapped into, because the people that have won it and taken the reins of it do not have our best interests at heart.
Dave Boden, it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. Let me just quickly recommend Dave's book. It's called Raising Gen Alpha. Dave, thank you for being with us on the programme today.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that you've enjoyed the programme today. As we wrap up this conversation, I just want to say a huge thank you to Dave Boden for sharing his wisdom and heart for this generation. These are huge topics that we've talked about today: identity, resilient faith, and the digital world our boys are growing up in. If you want to find out more about this topic, Dave's book is called Raising Gen Alpha. If you missed last week's episode on how the digital world is shaping girls, do go back and catch up. It sits alongside today's conversation, and I hope will help you to build a fuller picture of what our young people are facing. If you'd like to listen again, share this episode, or explore more of our content, you can find everything you need at twr.uk.com/on-demand. There's a whole library of programs there to support you, your family, and your faith. Thank you for spending this time with us today. We'll be back next week with another conversation to help you navigate life in the digital world. This podcast is a production of Transworld Radio UK. For more information, go to our website at twr.org.uk.